Is it working? I think it's working. Okay. I'm going to try going live 2 places at once. Okay. Oh, shit. We're live on TikTok and on YouTube. Look at me go. Okay. Typically, when it looks like this and I can see motion on the mic, that means that it's working. So I'm just going to assume that it's working. Let me know if you can see and hear me. I'm just going to hope for the best. Okay. You might be able to hear my dog chewing in the background. Please let me know if you can see and hear me. I'm live on TikTok and YouTube at the same time. Running this show by my motherfucking self. Okay. So chapter 1 was sort of like a background. This is In the Shadow of the Moons by Namsa Kong. And I'm adding my own commentary. Thank you, Seeking Truth. I can see and hear you. There was an interesting part I wanted to review again. Oh, shoot. Okay, I went too far. That's like chapter 2. Oh, chapter 3. There was like that system of bone cast. Here it is. Okay. Biological feudalism and classism. So Korea used to have kingdoms, and Reverend Moon was like obsessed. He was absolutely obsessed. He had custom gold and diamond plated crowns made for him and his wife Hak Jahan. And there's like pictures of him having an event at the White House where he's wearing a crown, and he has Congress people and like the president call him the king of the universe. And they were just like, what the fuck? And I felt like in the last recording, I skimmed over it too quick and I used the Korean names. So even there's a part that like clarifies it where Nansa Kong went back and did research and sort of laid it out for the people, right? She says, even the aristocracy in the ancient Korean kingdom of Silla was classified according to what was known as the bone rank system, or Kopunje. So Reverend Moon sort of made his own version of Kopunje, like the bone cast system. And I was born into that system, and so was every second generation Unification Church member. So if you were part of the Kopunje, you were part of the elite. Right? You were different from outsiders. You were different from peasants. You were different from heathens who were not blessed into the Unification Church at all. Right? But when you were in the Unification Church, you were still divided into 3 classes. And I definitely felt this to be true and experienced this. So in the traditional Korean bone rank system, they called it the holy bone class, and that's the highest class. Then they had the true bone class, and then they had the head class. So in the Unification Church, you had the true family, like the holy family. Sorry, holy and true are 2 different classes. In the Unification Church, or in other words, in the Kolpunje, you had the holy class, you had the holy family. So that's when if you were married directly to one of Reverend Moon's kids, if you were married into the holy family, like all of Reverend Moon's 13 kids were holy, and technically Nansa Kong was in this like holy class, right? Because that's what allowed her to be in the VIP mansion in Tarrytown, New York, versus just the member mansion, right? And then true bone was like second generation. So if your parents had already joined and you were literally born into this elite class of the Unification Church, you literally had been singing holy songs in utero, right? You had been separated from the rest of the world from birth before you could even speak English, right? Then you were part of the true bone class. And that's what I was born into. And then you had the head class. So you had just like a member. You joined later in life. You had done other sinful shit. You had believed other things. And then you drank the holy wine and you became a member of like the head class. So Reverend Moon just like verbatim copied and pasted this feudal system of like the bone rank system. And I thought that was really powerful to see her pull up the words from feudalism and call it what it was. In the West, we might call that a caste system or eugenics. And there's a system like in the West, especially in the United States, we're much more used to hearing that in terms of like the one drop rule and skin color, because we're so accustomed to building our society around building. I'll answer your question in a second. We're so used to like Jim Crow era, slavery based on what's the word? Phenotype, right? The caste system, the chattel slavery that white Protestant Christian landowners invented to separate their Irish slaves from their Jamaican slaves, right? It used to be you could just identify as a Christian and you could be a landowner, and then they're like, wait, Black people are becoming Christian? That's not cool. We need to come up with something else. And they paid a bunch of scientists to come up with this like caste system or rank system based on phenotype, right? Based on your physical appearance, which is markedly different from any other type of slavery that had ever existed in history, where it was sort of like, in order to be an honorable loser in war, you sort of had to accept the fact that you would be working for the people who defeated your culture for a set amount of time, and then you could be free again. And it was just sort of like this natural thing. It was like, okay, we could kill you, but since we defeated you fair and square, you're going to work for us. And they were like, okay, fine. And that's what slavery was in every other culture. White Protestant landowners invented a caste system, a bone rank system based on phenotype that traps people in slavery for the rest of time and does not offer them any way to become free. And same with like the bone rank system in feudal Korea before Christianity was existed or introduced, and the caste system in India, it's based on birth, right? It's not based on phenotype necessarily, but it's based on class. So chattel slavery was a way for Protestant landowners to first wipe out the indigenous cultures and then introduce a caste system based on class and phenotype, right? And then in India, they've had a caste system based on class for a long time. It's like whenever something is based on class, it's inescapable. They try to make it inescapable. And that's different from slavery that existed in times of war. So Seeking Truth says, is salvation regarded different in these three groups? Unification Church members don't talk about salvation at all. The word salvation is like very uniquely Christian and Baptist. They talk about cutting ties with Satan and indemnifying sin. So even people who find Reverend Moon, who accept Reverend Moon as their Messiah and drink the holy wine, we don't refer to them as like saved. Like that's a very uniquely Christ-obsessed thing. When you join the true family, when you join the elite club of being a Unification Church member, you still have to pay indemnity. You still have to do physical conditions, like 1,000 bows in 30 days or something, or 300 bows for 30 days, or going to Changpyeong and beating the spirits out of yourself. You still have to fast for 7 days before you can receive the blessing. Like, even though you graft yourself onto the holy blood lineage, like the Unification Church speaks much more bluntly in terms of like purifying your blood. So you're not saved. There is no salvation. You unhook your blood lineage. You graft your blood lineage away from Satan's bloodline. onto Reverend Moon's bloodline. And then you pay lots of money and do lots of physical and spiritual conditions to pay off that debt of sin. There's no salvation. No one's going to swoop in and be like, "Oh, you don't have to do any work now. You can live stress free." It's like you're constantly working off a spiritual debt in the Unification Church. Okay, cool. So, chapter 2. Chapter 1 was about the history of Reverend Moon. Chapter 2 is more about herself. She ended chapter 1 talking about how her parents joined the Unification Church and what their childhood was like. She talked, I think we ended chapter 1 with her talking about how her grandma really, really did not want her mom to get an arranged marriage and ran out of the house, burst into the church, and screamed at Reverend Moon and beat on his chest. And then she said, "The Reverend Moon has never forgotten how my grandmother burst into the church that day, beating on his chest with her fist, announcing him for marrying off her daughter to a man she didn't know in a church she did not trust. Over time, Sun Myung Moon and I both came to believe that I had inherited my grandmother's spirit." Here we go. Chapter 2. My earliest memories of a small, dark room at the end of a long, narrow hallway. If there are windows, I can't see them in my mind's eye. If there are furnishings, I can't envision them. I see only a tiny version of myself seated on the bare floor, encircled by darkness. And then I made a note here. Such a fascinating way to talk about an inherited self-concept in a cult. I am alone. The house is empty, but curiously, I am not afraid. What I am feeling is closer to resignation, an odd emotion to associate with a little girl not much bigger than a toddler. But that's what I felt even then, that my place in the world was fated and that my role in life was to endure. I don't know who I'm waiting for. My brother to come home from school, a babysitter to come from church, but I do know who I do not expect to see coming down that long, narrow hallway. My mother was away for most of my childhood. I spent my earliest years missing her with a longing that was deep and unarticulated, a physical ache in the hollow center of my heart. And that was really, really common for a lot of second gen. Their parents would be sent off to Russia for years at a time, sent off to Korea for years at a time, to Japan for years at a time. And there are a lot of second gen who are a little older than me who grew up, like, no matter what nationality they were, they grew up speaking Japanese or Korean first because Japanese or Korean aunties would raise them in these like communal daycare centers while their parents were off on mission trips. And it really created a lot of profound psychological and sometimes nervous system damage in those kids. And if you want to hear more about that, there's a podcast by another second generation Moonie that I've been on a couple times called Falling Out by Elgin Strait. He goes into a lot of detail about that because he spent a good 7 years or so in one of those daycare centers, and so did a bunch of his peers. Like my father, she was filled with the passion of a freshly minted religious convert. As the first disciples of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, my parents saw it as their mission to spread the word that the Lord of the Second Advent had come and to recruit new, even more impassioned members for the fledgling Unification Church. Children complicated that mission, even as our very existence was an expression of it. The Reverend Moon instructed the original 36 blessed couples to have as many children as possible in order to build the foundation of the true family of God. He expected them simultaneously to travel throughout Korea and eventually the world, preaching and witnessing on his behalf. The Reverend Moon taught his followers that God would take care of their children if his followers took care of him. The urgency of the Reverend Moon's mission superseded the personal bond between mother and child. I get really irritated because I've personally tried to make this point. I'm like, Reverend Moon said that serving him and serving Providence was more important than your relationship with your kids. And even other second gen who claim to be like down for the cause and down to speak up in public try to fight me on this. So I don't talk to them anymore. It was my parents' religious duty to bring us into the world, but from an early age, I knew that their first responsibility was to the Reverend Moon, not to us. They fed us, they clothed us, they sheltered us. I knew that they loved us. But the one thing that children most crave, their parents' time and attention, ours could not give to us. I was the second of 7 children born to Gil Jae-yu and Sung Pyo-hyung within the first 12 years of their marriage. I was born on a bedroll on the floor of our maternal grandmother's small house in Seoul. My grandmother had never forgiven her daughter for joining what she and most Koreans thought to be a crazy religious cult, but she never turned my mother away. The church itself had no money to share, so the Reverend Moon sent his disciples across the country, fortified with little more than their own fervor to survive. Oh, girl, I love your content. I think you're so funny and smart. Thank you for spreading awareness. You're welkies. You're welcome. My parents did not travel together. To maximize their impact, the Reverend Moon ordered his disciples to spread out to witness alone. My mother and father would set off in separate directions to Korea's small towns and even smaller villages. We would be left to the care of our grandmother, an assortment of aunts, or the women we called the sisters, unmarried church members, who served the Reverend Moon by babysitting the children of married disciples. Once I had my own children, it was even more difficult for me to understand how my parents could have done this, could have abandoned their babies so completely to the care of others, often strangers. How was this a model of a perfect family? Okay, cool. Just checking my mic. I do know that my brothers and sisters and I were luckier than some children. Some of the Reverend Moon's followers simply left their sons and daughters in orphanages in order to preach the word. A few never returned for them. I've since spoken to other ex-second generation Moonies who said that their parents legit tried to abandon them, and then they would like waddle around and find them, and their parents would be like annoyed. Like first gen had some serious like psychological issues, to be real with you. In 1965, the Reverend Moon described his ideal circumstances for the rearing of children. We would like to see a boarding house for the children of our members, where some responsible persons could raise them and educate them at least for a few years. This would release you for your necessary witnessing. We have people in our group who are well qualified and willing to conduct such a boarding house and school. This is in the future when we have more money to support such a house and the children. It will be very good for the children, good for the parents, and very good for the movement. No one can enter the kingdom of heaven as an individual, but as a family. He urged his early disciples, my parents among them, to find people who have the wealth to help us finance such a school. So they did. They did create a boarding house, and the way this is different from a regular preschool or childcare is these kids were literal babies. Like under the age of 2. And there are second gen who have gone on podcasts who were raised by a gaggle of random aunties at a boarding school for like the first 4 to 7 years of their lives. And they had to be reintroduced to their biological parents. And legit did not know who their biological parents were. And I think this is like the hardest thing to try to convey about the Unification Church, even to second gen who are like living in denial. It's like people always try to ask me, where were your parents when this cult was doing things to you? Where were your parents when your cult had you working for free for up to 20 hours a day? And it's like, oh, the cult was more important than my parents. Reverend Moon was my true father. My biological parents were just babysitters. They were irrelevant. They had other things to do for our true father, because he was the king in this bone class, and I actually ranked higher than my own parents in this feudal caste system. I would snitch on my parents sometimes. I was higher up in the bone rank system than my parents. My parents didn't have the right to parent me sometimes. Other parents who ranked higher in the church let me live at their house when it became obvious that my parents were inadequate. Because my dad had a drinking problem and he was violent, and my mom had psychological issues and she was a bitch, right? So something that's really not clicking for people who listen to cult podcasts is like, oh, your cult leader raises your kids. Your kids are your cult leader's kids now. You don't have parental rights. That's adorable, though, that your knee-jerk reaction is like, what about your parents? How has evening raised in a cult affected your relationship with your how has being in a cult affected your relationship with your parents as an adult? My parents still worship Reverend Moon. My mom is now the pastor and the accountant of the Portland Family Church, um, because it's dying and there's no one else there, and she's one of the most gung-ho members. She was one of the first full-time members in Australia. Um, she's very pro-MAGA. She is extremely racist. And she's extremely psychologically abusive. She medically abused my sister and was psychologically abusive to me, often calling me worthless, telling me that I deserve to die for leaving the movement. So we haven't spoken in 7 years. I filed a restraining order against my biological dad because he's had a drinking problem for as long as I can remember. And to this day, he still has outbursts where he'll threaten my mom with like knives. He has his own safe full of guns. And he goes to the shooting range often. Oh, wow. I didn't realize they were still in the cult. I'm so sorry. Thank you. I'm so proud of you. You're so strong. Yeah, I've never really had biological parents. I started looking into how to emancipate myself when I was like 12 or 13 years old. And then I looked at other kids in Oregon in the foster care system and at my public school, and I was like, rough. You're getting impregnated by your 15-year-old boyfriend and dropping out of high school to work at McDonald's. Don't think so. Like, what? You mean foster parents and step parents often enslave their adopted children for free labor and for the paycheck? No, thank you. And so I started networking with people who were more functional within the Unification Church and was like essentially de facto adopted by them. Yep. Totally valid to not want to go to the foster care system. Thank you. I also saw what it looked like when other second gen Moonies dropped out of high school and how much harder it was for them to navigate the world, and how they ended up having to go back to community college to get their GED anyway. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have as many prolonged sleepovers, like literally months or weeks at a time at friends' houses to make it through high school to get this diploma, and then I'm out E5000. Okay. How common is it for people to leave the Moonies? It seems difficult. That's a great question. I think it's impossible to say because Moonies have the biggest ego ever, and they always exaggerate how many members they have. Also, people who leave the Moonies are often overwhelmed and struggling to survive, so they don't really advertise themselves. And sometimes the only way to leave the cult is to tell yourself that you would never leave. You're not leaving. You're just taking a break. You're just taking a step back, right? And then when you do start leaving, you have an intense burnout and an intense mental health crisis, and you're not really in a place to tell anyone who could use that research that you've left the church. And that's kind of why I'm here online. And that's why the podcast Falling Out exists, and why the podcast Blessed Child by Renee exists. You should do an episode of the Was I in a Cult podcast. You're so right. You're so right. I've really been antisocial as hell. I've really just been like in my own little bubble on the internet. And I think it's because honestly, I've had some really bad experiences with people who just sort of pounced on me as soon as they found like my first video on YouTube. Like, I was so excited to be interviewed by this guy who was like an out and proud communist influencer, just to find out that he's like extremely hated on the internet and like was raised in a cult himself, like a far left cult. I was in a far right cult. He was in a far left cult. He tried to date me, he tried to give me money, he tried to flirt with me. And I was like, skirt, and found out he'd been like acting inappropriately with other people. So I think I needed to be in my own little bubble for a little bit, but now I'm like making a list of podcasts to go on. The mental health crisis after leaving the church was insane. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. And the gag is you're probably gonna have more than one, unfortunately. Whew. May I ask, what is their motivation? You mentioned they want to enter heaven. I don't understand the concept and why people join. It seems so cruel. I'm sorry to hear about your experiences. Um, so like most cults, the Unification Church sets up this premise that the world is broken, right? That the fall in the beginning of history, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, ruined everything for everyone. And God has been heartbroken and weeping for his lost children ever since. And then, like most religions, they say, look at this little book. We have all the answers. We're going to save the world. Don't you want to be a part of the group that saves the world? If you could bring about world peace in this lifetime, wouldn't you? What are you saying? What do you say? They flip it around on you and emotionally blackmail you. What do you mean? What do you mean you don't want world peace? What are you, a monster? What are you, a liar? You said you wanted world peace. Now you're not going to show up to our recruiting event. I mean, our luncheon, right? And so the Moonies in particular straight up lied. They said, we are not a church. We're not converting you to anything. This is not a religion. We don't talk about God. We don't pray. We don't have a Messiah. Like straight up bold faced lied to people's faces. And that's why there's a book and a movie. Well, a book called Heavenly Deception, a movie called Ticket to Heaven. They were told by Reverend Moon and by people in the church, say whatever the fuck you need to say. Lie. It is heavenly deception because they will thank you later for saving them. And then essentially, as you go to these like recruiting workshops, you used to be much more like sleep deprived, but really what the indoctrination is now that the Unification Church has done a lot of damage control and tried to modernize themselves. It's really social pressure. It's really just the effect of being influenced by other people's body language. It's really just like mob mentality and being love bombed, like being love bombed to fuck, like just not wanting to disappoint the happy golden retriever people all around you and like literally just getting swept up in their happiness. And then also constantly being like, I'm too smart to get brainwashed. They're not saying anything sus. They're not saying anything too complicated. I'm too smart for this. And the next thing you know, you physically don't want to let them down. You physically don't want to say no to the people you've been eating food with and singing songs with. And a lot of people like hesitantly agree to stay in the church because they think it's like not that bad and they tell themselves they can leave at any time. And then the next thing you know, it's you blink and it's 20 years later and you're married to a stranger. You know, it's like the sunk cost fallacy. So for some people, like for my mom, she genuinely bought into the very like convoluted divine principle and its claims to be able to weave together the theories of evolution and a belief in God as the one who said bang at the Big Bang, you know, God as the ultimate scientist. She took the divine principle and she took a textbook from when she was training to be an RN for a little bit. And that's how she came up with her own convoluted theories as how to medicate her own children and how to diagnose members of the church. She would like basically sit there thinking of herself as smarter than every doctor who has ever lived because she was one of the first church members in Australia and had spent so much time with the True family. And she'd say, oh, like Western doctors got this right, but what this really is someone in your ancestry has committed murder. Oh, the LGBTQ community thinks they have it right, but really what it is they're being attacked by spirits of the opposite gender, and that's the only reason they're attracted to people of the same sex. That's the only reason they want to cross dress is because they're being attacked by spirits. She would like go through this textbook for RNs and be like, well, True Father says this, and I've experienced this at Chongpyong. So that's what this really means. And that's what this really means. And then my dad, he was much less bought into the doctrine and he just wanted to have fun. He was raised Seventh-day Adventist where you have to be vegan and like he just wanted to eat good Korean food and sing songs. The songs in Seventh-day Adventism suck really bad. He wanted to be a bartender, he wanted to be the fundraising captain, and that's why my parents will never get divorced even though they fucking hate each other, is because they think that they are yin and yang and that they are destined to restore each other's blood lineages. Any hoops. My mom actually used to go to Israel and Palestine all the time to be a journalist for an extremely Zionist newspaper paid for by the Unification Church. Mhm. Where was I? Okay. I do know, so this is back to Nansa Kong. She's talking about, like, how could it be the model of a perfect family if parents were told to abandon their kids for, like, years at a time? I do know that my brothers and sisters and I were luckier than some children. Yep, a few never returned to them. Okay. And then financing a school. As hard as it was for me to be separated from my mother, life was no easier for her. Travel was difficult. She would beg or borrow money for a train ticket, hitch a ride on a hay wagon, and do whatever it took to bring the message of the new Messiah into the countryside. Her reward was often the hostility of her audience. Early members of the Unification Church were mocked and stoned, spit upon and jeered. Only occasionally were they heard. My mother combated the constant assault on her spirit with fervent prayer. While prayer replenished her soul, it did little for her belly, which was often swollen both with hunger and with child. She lived on rice and water, on the charity of farm women who would see her pregnant profile and take pity on her. I think of the ravenous appetite that marked my own pregnancies, and I'm amazed at the deprivation my mother suffered in silence. Yeah, my mom has crazy stories of hiking around alone in the dark in 5 feet of snow in Quebec, Canada, and in, like, Germany and France. Um, oh my goodness. Hello, everyone. Poverty and separation were not my parents' only hardship in the early years of their marriage. When I was still nursing at my mother's breast, soldiers burst into the small room my family rented in Seoul. The soldiers ordered my father out of the house and, while my mother looked on in terror, marched him off to prison. My father's crime was failing to register with the army. In Korea, military service was compulsory for young men. He had not deliberately evaded his military duty, he told me later. He had been assured that an exemption had been arranged. Oh, so the church didn't fulfill their promises, and then he went to prison for it. Yeah, that's what's heartbreaking is, like, in the US and Canada. My mom was almost matched to the son of a kidnapper who I believe, now that I think back to how she told the story, I think he was undercover. There was this, like, big buff football player jock dude who joined the elk farm that my mom was stationed at as a missionary in Quebec, Canada. And she got matched to him. And he tried to ask her to leave and told her that his dad was a kidnapper, like a dude with a van who was hired by some people's parents, paid tens of thousands of dollars to sneak onto the compound, put a bag over the person's head, carry them into the van, and then drive them off before the Moonies could catch them. And by that point, my mom was so like sold on the movement and had spent so much time degrading herself, starving herself, sleep depriving herself, that she said no. And she stayed. To be fair, her family kind of sucked. She didn't really have a family to go back to, and they never would have paid for a kidnapper for her. Okay. The soldiers did not tell my mother where they were taking my father that day. With me in her arms and my 2-year-old brother Jin in tow, she walked from jail to jail, from police station to station, all across Seoul until she found him. It never occurred to my mother to go directly to the Reverend Moon for help. He was too important a figure to bother with her personal problems, no matter how pressing. Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. When members get kidnapped, the movement doesn't do anything. Sometimes people on their fundraising team or the person who directly recruited them, like their spiritual parent, would feel really guilty and do something about it. They might like sue or try to get them back, but after a while it was just like, okay, well, remember your suicide training. Kill yourself or someone else rather than be taken away from your two parents. And even as recent as the 2000s, 2011, 2013, 2014, I remember being at the church headquarters in New York for Love and Life Ministries, listening to one of Reverend Moon's daughters, Injin Moon, who's been mentioned in this book already. She would show all of us video footage of members in Japan who were trapped because they'd been kidnapped by deprogrammers. They would go on hunger strikes and they would starve themselves and they would kill themselves. And she showed us footage of those people starving themselves and killing themselves and saying, like, this is what outsiders do to you. This is what outsiders are doing to our members in Japan. The church has now been outlawed in Japan. Well, it's not outlawed, but it's been stripped of their tax exempt status. It's no longer a religion, so they have to pay taxes. They're still allowed to do whatever they want, but they can't hide behind the guise of being a religion anymore. Okay. During my father's absence, she struggled mightily to keep the three of us housed and fed. Throughout it all, my parents never complained. They were doing the work of God. They considered their poverty ennobling. They accepted their tribulations as infinitesimal compared with the suffering that the Reverend Moon had endured in the formative years of the Unification Church, his imprisonments, his persecution at the hands of the godless communists, his long march south. The story of Sun Myung Moon's trials already had taken on the proportion of legend. By then, however, the Reverend Moon was living very well indeed, especially in contrast with his disciples. The Moon family occupied spacious rooms above the church headquarters, which were located in one of Seoul's better neighborhoods. They were supported by the labor of the Reverend Moon's followers, who served him and his family at table, cared for his children, cleaned their house, and washed their clothes. For most of my early childhood, we lived in a series of single rooms that were rented in houses in a Seoul slum known as Moontown. No shit, they had a whole town. That's funny. The name had nothing to do with the Reverend Moon or the Unification Church. The neighborhood was located on a treeless hillside high above. Why was my live access removed? Violation reasons, suicide and self-harm. You got me there. It will take about 24 hours to renew your appeal. Well, fine, TikTok. Fine. So rude. I should just make Substack. We should just go live on Substack. YouTube didn't do that. Sorry for TikTok. That's why I'm here on YouTube. I'm probably going to start investing a lot more time and energy into YouTube and Substack, where I should have been this whole time. Okay. For most of my early childhood, we lived in a series of single rooms, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the neighborhood was located on a treeless hillside above the South Korean capital and hence closer to the moon. It was a ghetto of small, dilapidated houses packed closely together on narrow, winding streets. The houses were all the same, single-story structures heated by coal stoves. Sounds like Appalachia, to be honest with you. Every house was topped with a tiled roof and surrounded by a gated stone wall, the top of which was embedded with shards of broken glass to discourage thieves who roamed the area. We lived in so many different rooms in Moontown that they blend together in my memory. I remember the outdoor steps of one house where Jin and I played family, feeding our baby sister Chung-suk pebbles that she obediently licked until a church sister stopped us. That's actually really cute. I remember another house where we rented 2 rooms at opposite ends of a long corridor. A sister lived in one room with us children. My parents had a small room of their own. One day, the couple who owned the house accused my parents of stealing coal. The sister became so upset at this assault on my parents' honesty that she protested angrily to our landlords, who promptly tossed all of us into the street. That's rough. The room I remember best was the scene of my warmest memory of my father. It was a large room divided by a small chest of drawers. My mother had just given birth to her fifth child, my sister Chang Suk. One of my aunts had come to help out. We four older children slept with my aunt on bedrolls on one side of the chest. My parents slept with the new baby on a futon on the other. Ours was the darker side of the room. I longed to sleep closer to my parents, closer to the light. As evening fell one night, I pretended to fall asleep on my parents' side of the chest. I prayed they would let me stay, snuggled next to them for the night. It was not to be. My father picked me up and carried me back to the dark side of the room. It was the most physical connection I remember having with him. I can still feel the ease with which he lifted me from the floor, the soft brush of his shirt against my cheek. I was so happy having him hold me that it took the sting out of my sadness at having to sleep so far away from him and my mother, so far away from the light. That's the other thing I've noticed is like, I don't know a single Unification Church family that's like physically affectionate, to be real with you. That moment of intimacy is so vivid, I think, because such moments were so rare. Ours was a life of numbing routine and grinding poverty. What intimacy there was the forced communal intimacy of the poor. There was no indoor plumbing in Moontown. We washed our faces and brushed our teeth at a public tap in an alley behind the house. We relieved ourselves in the festering latrines that served the entire neighborhood. Trucks would patrol Moontown to drain the latrines, but they never came often enough. I would delay a trip out back as long as I could. When I could wait no longer, I would hold my breath when I pushed open the door to the outhouse. The stench of human waste was overwhelming, even in the freezing months of winter. In the summer, the flies were everywhere. If I took my fingers from my nose long enough to shoo them away, I would have to gag back the vomit in my throat. I would burst out of the latrine, gasping for air. Once a week, my entire family would march down to the public bathhouse for a proper scrubbing. Each of us carried a small metal bucket with our cake of soap, our shampoo, a towel, and a clean change of clothes. We would pay our coins, and the boys would enter through one door, the girls through another. Inside were two large rooms, each equipped with enormous steaming hot pools. I can still see the dozens of women and girls sitting side by side, our naked skin turning pink in the hot water. There were ladies employed by the bathhouse who would scrub the backs of our wealthier neighbors for a small fee. We would rinse off in the public showers and head home physically cleansed for another week. So a couple things come to mind. I was always raised thinking bathhouse culture was normal. Like my parents went to bathhouses when they went to Chungpyeong in Korea and talked about it and told us all about it. There aren't a lot of bathhouses in Portland, Oregon, where I grew up. And my parents never paid for any of us children to go to Chungpyeong because they were too broke and they kind of low-key hated it. So they didn't pay for us to go. But it's like later when I went to, there are Korean spas in major cities like LA and New York, and I've gone to those a couple times. And it was like, I don't know, for some Westerners, being naked always has to be sexual. And that's always struck me as like really weird and kind of childish, to be honest. It's like in Japan and Korea, it's disrespectful to try to like be too modest at a public bathhouse. It's like, why are you making it weird? You know what I mean? Like you're supposed to just be like, okay, be naked, get yourself clean. Like, what are you doing? Stop making something weird that's not weird. And I tried to like bring that with me to rec centers, and it's like, just change, just do it. The difference in lifestyle for the leaders and the members are huge. Absolutely. Oh, the other thing that came to mind is like, we would have this standard of poverty in mind and like live by this standard of poverty when we went fundraising full time. So when you were fundraising full time for the Moonies, you had a $5 a day food budget. So you could only afford fast food, or you would pool all of your food budget together and buy groceries, and then live off like a cooler full of cheap, nasty groceries. And you would only bathe once a week, like once or twice a week. So we like emulated this poverty as young adults in the United States because it was like part of our conversion process, I guess, part of our like spiritual service. So I've lived like that, kind of like living in vans, only bathing once a week. It's not fun. It's not great. We were children, and children have no sense of the economic scale of things. We did not think ourselves especially poor or deprived. We were, after all, no different from our neighbors to the left and to the right. We played paper dolls on the steps and jacks on the broken sidewalks. We chased each other through the congested streets on our way to even more congested classrooms. We fought and laughed in the same proportion as those better off than we. Honestly, same. People tried to stop me on the street all the time when I was fundraising, being like, "Are you okay? Do we need to call your parents?" And it's like, no, my parents sent me here. Go ahead, call them. They'll be like, "Leave my daughter alone. We're so proud of her." They're like, "But you haven't bathed." And it's like, okay, and you bathe too much. Like, what about it? But you don't have any money. You have too much money. It didn't seem weird to me. And now it kind of does. That's kind of what your mental health crisis is suddenly waking up to how fucked up it all was. What set us apart was not money, but faith. Hey, from the start, I knew that our religion made our family different, that being a member of the Unification Church was not like being a Presbyterian or a Buddhist. I did not talk about my faith except with my friends at church. I knew that others thought our beliefs odd, even dangerous. I was content not to call attention to my religion, but I was neither especially ashamed nor particularly proud of it as a young child. Except perhaps at Christians. At Christmas, I longed for our family to be like the families of my non-church friends. Oh, at Christmas, not at Christians. Except perhaps at Christmas. Christmas trees and elaborate celebrations of the birth of Jesus were rare in Moontown because of the impoverishment that defined our neighborhood. But Santa Claus comes even to the poor in soul. He never came to our rented rooms. Every year I would go to sleep on Christmas Eve, secretly believing that this would be the year that Santa Claus would leave a small toy at the head of my bedroom, just as he did for all my friends. Every Christmas morning I would choke back salty tears when I realized that once again he had not remembered me or my brothers and sisters. It was not cruelty on my parents' part. They were so busy working to establish the church, their minds and hearts were so focused on their mission for the Reverend Moon that, my mother now tells me, it never even crossed her mind to buy us Christmas gifts. We observed Christmas as a day to commit ourselves to the teaching of Jesus. Even though we were taught that Jesus had failed to complete the mission of God intended for him, we were encouraged to acknowledge his many spiritual accomplishments by marking the day of his birth. The best way for adults to do that, according to the Reverend Moon, was to spend the day recruiting for the Unification Church. To be fair, to give credit to my biological parents and a lot of the parents who were realizing that they were abandoned by Reverend Moon by the time I was born, like in the Portland Family Church, I celebrated Christmas and Hanukkah. I double dipped because genetically I'm Jewish. And so my mom would make sure to bring us to the one other Jewish Moonies house. And we'd celebrate Hanukkah for at least one day. And eat latkes and spin dreidels and stuff. And we'd also celebrate Christmas. And then we started getting in contact with our Seventh-day Adventist relatives in Portland, mostly to get money from them and get cars donated from them because we were broke as hell, giving all our money to the Unification Church. But I got quadruple the holidays. We'd celebrate public holidays, like all the public Christian holidays. We'd celebrate Jewish holidays, and then we'd celebrate Mooney holidays. I was like, my life's a party. They believe in Jesus, do it seems, but do they read or accept the Bible? Think of the divine principle as the sequel to the Bible. Reverend Moon calls the divine principle the completed testament. So you do read the Bible as a Unification Church member. You have to have that sort of Abrahamic understanding of the world and the creation story in order for the divine principle to mean anything to you. And you do acknowledge that Jesus was a cool dude. But the story is always, yeah, but he failed and he's dead now. So what about it? And you don't ever display crosses. Um, Moonies would buy properties and then spend extra money to remove all symbols of the cross because they see it as nothing more than Rome's most popular public execution device. And in the same way that you would never wear a little necklace with an electric chair or a death sentence syringe, you would never disrespect the Messiah of the New Testament and Old Testament age by reminding everyone how he was murdered publicly by the state. In my opinion, that's still kind of based, right? But like Reverend Moon was the it guy, right? And Jesus had come to him specifically to be like, can you carry the baton? And he was like, I got you. So we talked about Jesus, but we were like, okay, we get it. But what about Reverend Moon, though? Reverend Moon is the new dude. Reverend Moon is the second coming of Christ. Reverend Moon is his. Jesus was Reverend Moon's predecessor. Reverend Moon is his protege. He's taking the reins and he didn't fuck it up and he didn't get murdered. But Reverend Moon is dead too. They don't see him as failed. His wife is still alive and still running his empire, so they still worship his wife as the queen of the universe. She's very much alive, and they were joined as the true family because he did not fuck up. He got married and had kids, which is what they always said Jesus was supposed to do. But now now some of his sons, there was actually a follower of one of his sons in the chat watching this. 1 or 2 weeks ago, and I had to block him because he was a dickhead, as they always are. But one of his sons is convinced that he's the new Messiah, and so he's trying to steal members away from his mom and constantly says that his mom should be executed, like beheaded. So like his children are fighting over all of the assets they can legally get their hands on. So like Carr Arms was owned by the Moon estate. It's no longer owned by Mrs. Moon. Carr Arms was taken over by his sons. So like all the businesses and properties that his sons own, they took all of it. They liquidated a bunch of it. They took all of that profit to buy new properties in Texas and Pennsylvania. They registered their own religion. And now there's like an AR-15 church that's been in the news a bunch where one of Reverend Moon's sons wears a crown of bullets, like made out of semi-automatic bullets. And a requirement of being in his movement is buying AR-15s from Carr Arms. And they talk about, it's the Rod of Iron Church. They talk about getting ready for a civil war. They drove busloads of people to the Capitol. They donated millions and millions of dollars to the Trump campaign and the Save the Steel fundraiser that Trump did. And they're aligning themselves with bikers and the MAGA movement. So there's a divided faction now. They're, depending on who you ask, either way, none of them believe that Reverend Moon failed. He's just physically dead now and doing a lot more work in the spirit world. But depending on who you ask, either his wife, Mrs. Moon, is carrying on the mission, or his son is carrying on the mission. Actually, there are two sons. There's like the owner of Carr Arms and Sean Moon, the head of the Rod of Iron Church, and they've got their thing going on with the businesses they own. And then there's a different son, an older son, who started losing his shit because he was going to be the heir to the Reverend Moon estate. And then he started acting up and was too arrogant and presuming too much, and it pissed off his dad before he died. He owns Service for Peace. And there's footage of him in documentaries of the Unification Church smacking members across the face and screaming at them. His headquarters is like in the Philippines or some shit. Okay. We could not make Santa Claus come to our rooms, but we took our pleasure where we found it. My brother Jin used to walk the streets of Moontown, searching the windows for the telltale blue glow that signaled the rare house with a television set. He would hope for an unlocked door, and on finding it so, tiptoe into the room where a family would be gathered around the TV. He would sometimes be able to watch an entire program before someone detected the stranger in their midst and chased him back into the street. Can you imagine? You look around, you're like, who the fuck are you? Oh my God. I was admiring as I was shocked by my brother's boldness. I could not imagine being so forward. Could you imagine? No, she couldn't. Maybe because of all the time I spent alone when I was small, I was uncomfortable with people, even with my relatives. For a year, when I was 4 years old and Jin was 6, we were sent 200 miles away to live with my mother's sister and her husband in Korea's second largest city, Busan. Our parents simply could not afford to feed and house their growing family. Our aunt and uncles were childless. They ran a small pharmacy and lived in a single room upstairs. They were kind to us, both Jin and I. They were kind to us, but both Jin and I longed for home. There was a back room to the store where I stayed and played alone while my aunt and uncle worked. I can still remember my happiness when Jin would join me there after he returned from school. We would sneak little treats, especially a healthy drink called pakasu, out of the store and into the back room to enjoy clandestinely, an act of subterfuge I would never have dared on my own. My little sister Chunsuk had been sent at the same time to live with my maternal grandparents in their 2-bedroom house in Seoul. My mother's older brother was living there with his wife too. They had no children themselves, and my aunt adored my little sister, treating her more like a daughter than a niece. My mother later confessed that she regretted sending us all away for so long, that she wished she had found a way to keep her family together while she served the Reverend Moon. At the time, though, he was her priority, not us. It was not the last or even the deepest regret my parents would have about the sacrifices they expected their children to make in the name of Sun Myung-moon and his church. As soon as I returned from Busan, my mother enrolled me in a public school. I was only 5, a full year younger than all of my classmates. After so much time alone, the sight of this noisy schoolhouse overflowing with rambunctious children filled me with terror. On as many mornings as not, I would refuse to go in. This strategy backfired, of course. A teacher would have to come and get me, calling all the more unwanted attention to me as I was dragged into the classroom. Oh my gosh. Okay, not that much longer. There were as many as 80 children packed into every classroom of my elementary school. Wow, 80. 80. I was miserable, lost in the crowd, too shy to communicate even my most basic needs. So that's actually really common in children who are abandoned as infants, is like you learn structural dissociation. You learn that when you cry, no one's going to help you, so you stop crying. Hi, Faith. I'm 2 generations too. Oh, you're second generation. I'm in Korea. My mom is Japanese. I've chased Mooney's truth lonely. I changed my phone number and deleted a lot of Mooney's friends. Good job. I feel sad that I can't communicate with you well because my English is not very good. It's okay. I'm very embarrassed that I don't speak Japanese or Korean. I'm just a dumb American who only speaks one language. And even most Americans can't speak English very well. But I truly enjoy your videos and always support you. Thank you so much for sharing them. You're welcome. My youth was colored by countless pains and struggles. Me too, sister. Yeah, I had to change my phone number and move multiple times to start over. And then the freaking pandemic happened. I had to move a bunch more times. Well, I'm glad this is finding the people who need to find it. I knew it would. I knew the people trying to recover would find me. Because I remember how aggressively I was hunting for like-minded people and survivors when I was first starting to leave. Or first time starting to recover for real. Now I'm getting all nervous. I'm starting to blush. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay. The experience Experiences in the book and your own are so traumatic. I was in Shinchonji, which developed after the Moonies, but the Moonies are so much worse. My heart goes out to you. My heart goes out to you too. I don't know how beneficial it is to constantly be like in a trauma competition. But yeah, Shinchonji, if it's based on the Moonies, you can relate to Severance just as much as we can. And I'm happy to have you here. There were as many as 80 children packed into every classroom of my elementary school. I was miserable, lost in the crowd, too shy to communicate even my most basic needs. I can still recall the cruel laughter of my classmates as a puddle of urine formed beneath my desk. I had been too scared to tell the teacher I needed to use the bathroom. I was more at home in the church, which was central to our lives from the very beginning. That's exactly how I felt, and I remember having a hard adjustment period when I first started going to public school. And my parents at one point pulled me out of public school to send me to private school because I was regurgitating a bunch of Mooney stuff. And I had undiagnosed ADHD. And I was like out of control. I remember in preschool, I remember peeing my pants at least once, just like this, because I was like, I'm not allowed to have needs. I don't know these people. They're outsiders. They don't know me. Let me see. And the church was like second home. Church felt so much more comfortable than school. In place of fairy tales at bedtime, our mother told us inspirational stories about the life of the Reverend Moon. We knew his biography better than we knew our own. Hanging photographs of the Reverend Moon and the True Family was one of our first rituals each time we rented a new room. Yep, you got to hang Reverend Moon in each room of the house, and it becomes like a magical talisman that protects you or some shit. That room would also have a shrine. Correct. You also have to set up your altar because we're secretly Shinto/Buddhist. Let me see. In the center would be a picture of true parents surrounded by flowers and shimjung, or heart candles. The candles were blessed by the Reverend Moon and believed to weaken Satan's power. Sunday is the day of worship in the Unification Church, although our day begins much earlier and lasts much longer than that of mainstream Christian sects. We rise before dawn to prepare for the pledge service, which begins at 5 a.m. Even the youngest children and babes in arms are expected to attend. Yep. Oh, how we hated to rise so early when we were small. The pledge is also recited on the first day of each month and on church holidays. Yep. Once we stumbled from our sleep, we would gather before the shrine. We would bow 3 times to represent a bow to God, true Father, and true Mother. And then we would recite the words entitled, My Pledge. I had memorized every word by the time I was 7 years old. Oh, she only had 5? That's so cute. She only had 5 paragraphs. Okay, trigger warning to everybody who's a former cult member and a cult baby, because she writes it out for the outsiders. Okay, so I guess I should read it. It's interesting to see the version that she recited versus the ones that we did. So number 1, as the center of the cosmos, I will fulfill our Father's will, the purpose of creation, and the responsibility given to me for self-perfection. I will become a dutiful daughter and a child of goodness to attend our Father forever in the ideal world of creation by returning joy and glory to Him. This I pledge. It sounds a little different in Korean and in the way that they translated it for American church members, but it's essentially the same thing. Number 2, I will take upon myself completely the will of God to give me the whole creation as my inheritance. He has given me His word, His personality, and His heart, and is reviving me who had died, making me one with Him and His true child. To do this, our Father has persevered for 6,000 years, the sacrificial way of the cross. This I pledge. Number 3, as a true daughter, I will follow our Father's pattern and charge bravely forward into the enemy camp until I have judged them completely with the weapons with which he has been defeating the enemy Satan for me throughout the course of history, by sowing sweat for earth, tears for man, and blood for heaven, as a servant but with a father's heart, in order to restore his children in the universe lost to Satan. This I pledge. Number 4, the individual, family, society, nation, world, and cosmos who are willing to attend our Father, the source of peace, happiness, freedom, and all ideals, will fulfill the ideal world of one heart in one body by restoring their original nature. To do this, I will become a true daughter, returning joy and satisfaction to our Father, and as our Father's representative, I will transfer to the creation peace, happiness, freedom, and all ideals in the world of heart. This I pledge. What the fuck is the world of heart? Actually, I know exactly what that is because this is the same organization that funneled millions and millions of dollars through the Christian Heritage Foundation, now known as the Heritage Foundation. The world of heart, according to Project 2025, is the one where you're hired or fired not based on your ability and your education or your merit, but on your loyalty to the movement being white Christian nationalism. The world of heart is when your loyalty to a Christo-fascist leader is the measuring stick used to measure your worth and your value. Christian business owners still act like this. I was wrongfully fired at the beginning of this year by a dude who ran his business this way. He kept the people who were the most extreme COVID deniers and anti-vaxxers, and he fired me because I was expecting him to hold his favorite people accountable when they broke the law and tried to steal commission money from me. They care about loyalty to the movement more than workers' rights or man-made laws. Anyways, number 5. I am proud of the one sovereignty, proud of the one people, proud of the one land, proud of the one language and culture centered upon God, proud of becoming the child of the one true parent, proud of the family who is to inherit one tradition, proud of being a laborer who is working to establish the one world of the heart. I will fight with my life. I will be responsible for accomplishing my duty and mission. This I pledge and swear. This I pledge and swear. This I pledge and swear. Sorry, I've been living in my outsider personality for so long. I really just suddenly had visceral, somatic flashbacks and could smell holy candles for a second. And I was like, wow, that the same physical body I'm in right now did all those things. I felt my old cult personality for a second. That was a trip. That I just, I had a That's So Raven moment. I was like, anyways. After the pledge service, our parents would leave us to go to hear the Reverend Moon to preach at church headquarters at 6 a.m. He would sometimes talk for hours. As many as 15 hours was not unusual. He would be annoyed if anyone in the congregation left to use the bathroom during his sermons. So Sundays could be quite an ordeal for adults seated on the wooden floor of the church's main meeting hall. I began to attend Sunday school as a very small child. It was a long trip from Moontown, requiring several bus changes. My mother would slip our bus fare and offering coins into one of Jin's hands and my own hand into his other. I wore a red cotton knitted hat that tied under my chin. That's so cute. In my memory, I am always looking up at my brother's kind face as we walk hand in hand down the street. I always looked up to Jin. Even as a boy, he had a wisdom beyond his years. He was kind in a way that I knew I was not. When we played school, he would be the teacher and my little sister and I the students. When Chung-suk did not know the answer to a question, he would help her. I'm ashamed to remember how I would scream and yell that he was being unfair, that she was cheating, that he was giving her an undue advantage. How patient he was as he explained the need for older ones to help teach the younger ones. I was secretly humiliated by his goodness, but I was a stubborn girl. I could never admit that I was wrong. Invariably, it would be Jin who would apologize after an argument that I myself had provoked. This is how I perceived a lot of the guys that I grew up with, and something that's always been shocking to me is Like, sometimes even when people stop attending church and they stop believing Reverend Moon's the Messiah and they stop listening to their parents and they start drinking and they start dating, they'll still hang out with other second generation to have this really pure brother-sister relationship because this feels impossible to find in secular society. It's really all about fucking. It's really all about sex appeal. And there's something so safe and so wholesome and, like, fulfilling about being able to rely on friends and people who feel like mentors of the opposite sex. Or even, like, if you have same-sex attraction, if you are queer and you would be romantically attracted or sexually attracted to people in the same type of body as you, still, like, having these really, really pure platonic friendships, it just feels really hard to find or replicate anywhere else. And so I know people who will honestly hold back their own healing process and stay a little bit indoctrinated if it means being able to keep this, like, really pure platonic sort of dynamic in their life. And that's been one of the most heartbreaking things for me to try to let go, especially as someone who doesn't feel sexual impulses as much as other people, because I'm sort of like on the asexual spectrum a little bit. It's been really irritating. It's been really, really heartbreaking to try to let that go. And I missed being called Oni and Nuna, and I miss having Onis and Nunas. I know I'm saying it wrong. It's like I say it like onion. But I miss that. And I think that's also part of the appeal that makes people stay, is that sense of really pure, like, wholesome family that doesn't really exist in extremely commercial, capitalist, individualist, hyper-competitive American society. As an American member, I can say that much. Um, my brother was no saint, though. Jin had a mischievous side. There was a market near one of the bus stops on the way to church. Jin and I would sometimes go there instead of Sunday school, spending my mother's coins on treats. We did not eat well at home. Rice and bean sprouts was our daily staple, so my brother and I often could not resist stuffing ourselves with spiced rice cakes, fish cake soup, or fried vegetables. Those are treats? Fish cakes? I thought you were going to say haichu. I thought you were going to say ice cream. Damn. You didn't even eat sugar? Okay. Returning home from one such illicit outing. You didn't get Frosties. You didn't get Twinkies. Now I'm crying. Returning home from one such illicit outing, we were confronted by my mother, who asked us to explain that day's Sunday school lesson. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I was ready to confess. But when Jin smilingly began to recount some Bible story he recalled from a previous week, I was amazed at how convincing he was, but we were both chastened by such a close call. We decided not to take any more chances. The next week, we began faithful attendance at Sunday school. The church itself was one of several buildings on a very large piece of property in Seoul. We passed through an ornate security gate and into a large courtyard. We left our shoes on a rack inside the front door. I loved to wait in the entrance hall to watch the Moon children come down from their living quarters upstairs. Mrs. Moon would lead them down the staircase, all of them neat and attractive, in expensive clothes, laundered by one of the church sisters. Mrs. Moon herself was so young and beautiful that it was hard for a little girl not to admire this queenly woman. We all called her amonim, the Korean word for mother. The Reverend and Mrs. Moon would eventually have 13 children, but there were not so many when I was small. Jae-jin, their eldest daughter, was 5 years my senior. See, call me a bad Moonie. I mean, obviously, because I'm, like, now out and proud an ex-Moonie and very anti-Moonie. But I never memorized all of the true children's names, and I often forget there was an oldest sister named Jae-jin. Hyojin, the eldest boy, was 4 years older than I. A girl, Injin, was born less than a year before me. Hyungjin was born the same year as I, and Unjin, her sister, was born the year after. The Moon's son, Cookjin, was 4 years younger than I. Oh, Cookjin is the one who owns Car Arms now. The Moon's other children were born after they moved to America in 1971. I admired the Moon children. We all did. We coveted their beautiful mother and powerful father. We were taught to accept the special treatment they received from adults trying to curry favor with the Reverend Moon. We tried to maneuver one of them into our Sunday school groupings because each week we were told that whichever group contributed the most money to the offering would be rewarded. Having one of the Moon children in your group was an obvious asset. The rest of us were poor, but each week the Moon children came to Sunday school grasping crisp new bills to place in the collection plate. Those bills made a lasting impression on me. I collected shiny Korean coins when I was a little girl. I would select only the shiniest ones, polishing them even brighter and bring them to church on Sundays as my special offering. I did not have much, but I would give the best of what I had to God and the Reverend Moon. When I had children of my own, I continued this childhood habit, searching my purse for the cleanest, newest dollar bills for them to offer up to God. In Sunday school, we learned not only about the divine principle and the revelations of the Reverend Moon, we heard stories and parables, much like the Bible stories told to children in mainstream Christian religions. However, our stories did not have Jesus as their central figure. Oh, the phrase central figure. Excuse me while I have a small PTSD stroke. Okay. They did not have Jesus as their central figure, but Sun Myung Moon. We listened to accounts of his spiritual struggle to establish our religion. We heard tales of his suffering and persecution at the hands of non-believers. We were taught that he was a historic figure who carried the burden of fallen man on his strong shoulders. We could not imagine a holier or braver leader than Sun Myung Moon. We admired the two children with a similar reverence. We memorized the names and accomplishments of all the Moon children. We added the respectful word Nim to their first names when we addressed them. Their academic and artistic accomplishments and their higher level of being were offered to us as evidence of their superiority. We came as close to worshiping them as imaginable. Yep, no lies were told. There was a hierarchy even among ourselves. The blessed children of the original 3 disciples were on a plane by themselves, followed by those of us who were offspring of the next 33 couples. Among all of our parents, there was fierce competition to push forward their children as prospective brides and grooms for the next generation of Moons. One's status in the church was directly related to one's relationship with the Reverend and Mrs. Moon. For me, the promised pastor sends shivers down my spine. I can relate to your reaction. I hate that the word triggered is like mocked and overused because it's real. Like you hear those syllables and you're like, you're like sent to the past real quick. Clocked overhead. Okay. To become an in-law was to ensure your family a place in the inner circle. What did I say? What did I say at the beginning of this recording? Exactly. Okay. For those children whose parents had not been blessed, the church could be a cruel place. Yep. My brother was near tears relating an incident one Sunday in which a young boy, a non-blessed child, put his bus ticket in the offering plate, only to have it rejected by an insensitive adult who chastised the boy for his foolishness. Jin was horrified. It was clear that the bus ticket was the boy's most valuable possession. I think, honestly, that's how a lot of the rules started to change church to church when the Moon family got older and took a step back, like several steps back, and families were left to do home church by themselves. You would have moments of conflict like this where like a really pure child, and when I say pure, I don't mean like in the bullshit doctrine of the church and their pure blood lineage. I mean like literally an innocent child who just has natural born compassion for the other children next to them. They'd be like, why? And their parents would be like, you know, now that you ask me and no one's here to slap me with a ruler and send me to Chungpyeong, I don't know why. So we're going to change the rule. And no one has to know. Who's going to know? No one's going to know. And so rules would change like church to church. That happened all the time. All the time. And essentially that's how Jeff Adshead ended up making his own spin-off program that was markedly different from MFT or STF. parents started making their own workshop because they realized they could change the rules. And the Moon family were so preoccupied with themselves and their multi-billion-dollar empire that they weren't going to do anything. Okay. As children, we rarely had any interaction with the Reverend Moon himself. I didn't even know that was the next sentence. Look at that. We saw him on Sundays and on church holidays, and there were many of those. Parents' Day, Children's Day, Day of All Things, God's Day, True Parents' Birthday. Parents' Day commemorates the marriage of Sun Myung Moon and Hak Jahan, a perfect union that we believed restored Eden and created the foundation for the establishment of heaven on earth. Children's Day on October 1st celebrates our connection to the true parents as children of God. The Day of All Things symbolizes man's dominion over the rest of creation. God's Day is January 1st, the first day of the new year, when we recommit ourselves to the Reverend Moon's mission. Music and food always played a central role in church festivals. Children were expected to entertain the adults, 1,000%, who would have laid out fruit and prepared foods on elaborate offering tables before the Reverend and Mrs. Moon. I dreaded being selected to perform for the Reverend Moon. I didn't. I ran up on stage and snatched the mic out of people's hands because I'm a ham. I loved it. Let me see. In the 4th grade, no, I was still very shy, and there was no disguising the fact that I had a terrible singing voice. In the 4th grade, I was chosen with 2 other blessed children, girlfriends of mine, to sing for the Reverend and Mrs. Moon before the entire congregation. We were terrified, which did not help our performance. Oh, okay. It is hard for a child to be calm when she is face to face with the man she believes is an emissary on earth from God himself. That same year, my parents began sending me to private school. By then, we could afford to rent a modest house, but our family was by no means financially secure. In Korea, education is a parent's highest priority. That's why I don't understand why, especially like Trump supporting and conservative Americans, are like making fun of people who believe in science and get educations. And they're like bragging about being dumb as fuck. In Korea, education is a parent's highest priority. Like, that's a uniquely brainwashed conservative American thing. My mother and father thought nothing of going without basic comforts to ensure that their 7 children received the best education possible. We had few family vacations, but I had piano lessons every day. Their commitment to education did not mean, however, that my parents always paid the tuition bill on time. One afternoon, our teacher asked several of us to remain after class. Payment was overdue. The teacher intended to visit each of our homes to collect the money. I was too ashamed to let my teacher and classmates see the shabby house where we were living, so I took them to my father's office instead. Industry, the Reverend Moon teaches, is the foundation upon which God's kingdom will be built. He now controls a business empire that includes food processing, fisheries, manufacturing, computers, pharmaceuticals, shipbuilding, and electronics. Ilhwa was the first building block of that empire. Ilhwa is a health company that produces more than 40 pharmaceutical products in 4 modern manufacturing plants in Korea. It bottles carbonated spring water and a popular soft drink and markets 10 different kinds of ginseng products. I once spent Thanksgiving in Boston, in Worcester, with a family whose dad was a chemist for Ginseng Up, which was owned by the church. My father created Ilhwa from nothing, and he was still broke as hell and couldn't pay his daughter's school fees on time. By the time I led my teacher and classmates to his office, my father was presiding over a very successful company. I could see they were impressed, and I basked in my father's success. My father was wiser than many of the Reverend Moon's ardent early followers. He committed himself to the church, but he also completed his education. He did not use his pharmaceutical degree during a decade of street corner witnessing and church preaching. But in 1971, the Reverend Moon handed him $500 and told him the church should develop and manufacture ginseng products. The Reverend Moon had been told of the popularity of ginseng in Japan, where the church was expanding its influence. A Japanese member advised him, correctly as it turned out, that there would be a market in Korea as well. My father had never actually seen the ginseng root, though he knew that for centuries the perennial herb had been credited by those in the East with extraordinary curative and restorative powers. Ginseng was believed to retard aging, promote sexual virility, and boost energy. He began the most profitable pharmaceutical company in Korea with a trip to the local market to get a good look at what all the fuss was about. For the next 10 years, I barely saw my father as he worked to build Ilhwa into a corporate giant specializing in Korean ginseng products, including tea, capsules, extract, and beverages. He was gone when I woke up in the morning, and he was still at work when I went to sleep at night. My father transformed an idea into a major money-making enterprise for Sun Myung Moon. One of Ilhwa's products, Mekol. If you've been to Chungpyeong or if you've been to Korea, you've had Mekol. They would bring Mekol back from Korea for us at the Portland Church all the time. Mekol, MCCOL, Mekol is a soft drink almost as popular as Coca-Cola in Korea. Ilhwa's Mekol and Ginseng Up, which we brought to the United States, and its bottled mineral water have made the company Korea's largest soft drink manufacturer, with 62% of the market share and exports to more than 30 countries. My father's impetus for creating Mekol had as much to do with serving the poor as building profits for Ilhwa. The main ingredient of Mekol is barley. Its popularity, Sun Myung Moon drinks it even in America, created a market for barley farmers who live on subsistence earnings in Korea. The son of a farmer, my father toiled not for earthly riches, but for heavenly reward. The riches went to Sun Myung Moon. Damn. Her dad created ginseng up in Mekol. And that's the end of chapter 2. Here's a photo of the author. I wonder where she is now. I bet you I could interview her if I wanted. I don't know how I lasted an hour and 26 minutes. Questions, comments, concerns? Can't believe I just got banned from TikTok Live. Actually, I can. Thank you so much for reading. You're welcome. Alrighty. Same time, same place. Next Saturday, Pacific Standard Time. Nice to meet you, Nessa. Good to see you again, Seeking Truth. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Auntie Jen Jen. Bye.